From Just Disciple. I am Kenny, and this is
Ken.
and we are glad to be with you. Thank you again for watching this video and allowing us to have a voice in your life. Ken, today we're going to talk about a topic that is
Not controversial at all.
Not controversial at all. Everyone completely agrees 100%, right?
Yep, 100%. It's going to be pretty quick.
There's a question out there. Can Christians smoke weed? Or I guess better to say, is it permissible for Christians to smoke weed, smoke marijuana? And I think as we sort of survey the landscape of evangelicals and evangelical pastors, leaders, theologians across the Western civilization, we're probably going to get a lot of similar conclusions.
Yeah.
I think generally a lot of pastors are going to give a lot of answers that seem very close to one another. But I think what you're going to get is different motivations and reasons. So a lot of us may end up with the same conclusions, but we don't get there the same way. Kind of like, remember back in middle school doing math and algebra, where your teacher didn't care as much about the answer, but more show your work, to show how you got that answer. And so that's kind of what we're going to do in this video. Not just give our thoughts and answer the question, but to kind of show our work, give some insights as to how. So, Ken, answer the question for us. Why are we having a conversation?
To Colorado as an industry for weed, it's become something that generations of weed or kids at a young age are being exposed to it more regularly. So it's the reason why we need to address it, because
States have passed laws and basically are choosing to ignore the federal laws and in those cases. And you've got now several states where marijuana is now illegally being commercialized. And so you've got, I think in some parts of California, you've got more marijuana clinics than you do Starbucks in some parts. And that's certainly the case in parts of Colorado and Washington State and probably in lots of other places soon. And so the question comes up frequently is it sin? So if someone asks you the question, is smoking weed a sin? How do you respond and approach to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wish it was really black and white. Like, I wish the scriptures would have said, hey, smoking weed, sin.
That's not in the Bible?
That's not in the Bible.
Thou shalt not smoke the reefer? That's not in the Bible?
No, it's not. Thou shalt not smoke MJ. It's just not there.
It's not in the
So
Bible.
all of a sudden, you're just like, oh, how do we do this? So then it actually takes us as theologians a little bit more work to look into the scriptures and figure out what are the principles in scriptures that could help us process if this is sin or if it's beneficial for us or what it is. So the first passage that I like to think about is 1 Corinthians chapter 6, where it talks about things are permissible, but are they beneficial? So when we look at smoking marijuana, what are the benefits that it could actually give us as human beings to get closer to the Lord? I mean, that's the major thing that I look about when you look at 1 Corinthians 6, is that in your relationship to God, is this beneficial? The second part of the beneficial is it beneficial to the flourishing of human society and the growth of depth and relationship with it? And when you ask those two questions, at least, I have found, in particular, anecdotally, and then just talking to people, it seems that marijuana is not actually beneficial, but can be detrimental to both of those. So that's the first question that I ask. The second question that I typically ask when people ask me if it's okay is the motivation to their heart. Why do they want to smoke it? What's the reasoning behind it? And is it because they're trying to escape something? Are they trying to find comfort? God has given us, by His grace, gifts in this world that we can use to help benefit us. But some of those can be detrimental and can be addictive. And I think marijuana is one of those things that can lead to someone who has an addictive personality, can lead to people being more addicted and running to marijuana versus running to Christ. And that's what I found, that many times the motivation of why they're running to it is just to escape something when they're supposed to be running to the Lord? So those are kind of some questions I think about when it comes to, is it a sin or not?
Yeah, I think your approach is similar to the approach I would take, and is the approach I think we would commend to people watching this video. Yeah, I'm really hesitant to ever say that something is a sin if the Bible hasn't clearly said it's a sin.
Yeah.
And so I'm always nervous if someone says, "Well, is this sinful?" Well, if the Bible doesn't explicitly say that it is, I'm hesitant to say yes, definitely to that. And so I think, like you, I'm asking myself the question. I'm not asking myself, is this sinful? I'm asking myself, is this wise? Does this make sense?
Yeah.
Is this prudent? I think that's a better question to ask. Full to eat 2 dozen donuts in one sitting? Maybe not, but is it wise, right?
Yeah.
I think
it's a good way to think
you would
about
say
it.
it's not wise, right? It's not healthy. And so I think marijuana largely falls into that same case. The one New Testament theme, and we see this theme a little bit in the Old Testament as well, but there's a very clear New Testament theme of the idea that God takes joy in self-control.
Yeah.
God is self-controlled. He's not impulsive or erratic, and therefore God wants us to be like him. He wants us to not be impulsive or erratic. He wants us not to be overly subjective where we can't make good decisions. God wants us to be wise. God wants us to be prudent. God wants us to make good decisions, to be sober-minded, right? And so one of the things that Paul clearly hits on in the New Testament, particularly in the book of Galatians, is that drunkenness clearly leads you to a point where you can't make wise decisions.
Yeah.
So Paul is very clear in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul, do not ever get drunk, right? He doesn't say alcohol is a sin. It's not. But he clearly says being drunk is a sin.
Yeah.
So using alcohol and consuming alcohol, not sinful, but using it in a way to make good choices is sinful, right? And it's less the alcohol, it's now you can't make good choices.
Yeah.
And so I think marijuana is the same way. The one distinction, though, I think between marijuana, specifically smoking weed, smoking pot versus drinking a beer, is, and I'm not an expert by any means, but the articles I've read and the guys I've talked to, is that it's possible to have a beer or two with zero inebriation. You can go out and have a beer or two. Maybe if you're an overweight man, you definitely can have more than that, and it have zero impact on your body. So therefore, it's possible to consume alcohol and not violate the New Testament's prohibition of being drunk. Everything I've read about marijuana is that's not possible. That even the smallest amount of smoking weed or other marijuana consumptions, edibles and other things, they impact your motor functions and they begin to inhibit the parts of your brain that basically help you be self-controlled.
Yeah.
So it is possible to have a beer and not lose self-control. It's not possible to smoke a blunt and not lose some element of self-control. And I know some people watching this disagree with that. That's not my opinion. That's the opinion of the vast majority of people across the spectrum, theologically, politically, right? People are saying, hey, you're going to get something, but if you smoke a little bit of weed, it's going to get a little bit of a buzz, but you can drink a little bit of alcohol and not get any buzz.
Yeah.
So I don't see how you can consume marijuana, how you can smoke weed and not violate Paul's expectation of always being in a position to be sober-minded. I can see someone consuming alcohol and still being sober-minded. I can't see someone consuming marijuana and being 100% sober-minded. Therefore, I believe it's wisest for Christians to not go down that road at all. Maybe that makes me sound like an old fuddy-duddy. Maybe that makes me sound like a legalistic, fundamentalistic. I don't know. I'm just trying to be wise in how I approach this sort of situation.
Yeah. And I know sometimes the challenge can be some people who do smoke weed will say something like, no, man, weed just relaxes me. It calms my brain down. It does stuff to me. But I'm like, how calm does it make you that potentially it could have gone to a point where you're not sober-minded and alert, right? Where you are supposed to act a certain way. And like when we talked about what is sin, whether it's a sin of commission or being commission or omission, where you should be doing something, but you're not. Right, and many times I found that people become extremely passive, where they're just like, just let it go, and not actually be assertive in the way they should be. So unfortunately, we wish the scriptures were like black and white on this. Yeah. It is a gray area where it doesn't specifically say it, but at the same time, there are a lot of principles that will lean more towards like this is not a wise principle. It's not ideal, and very quickly can lead to sin.
Yeah, you alluded to it earlier. We should not be asking, is this right or wrong? we should be asking what makes the most sense.
Yeah.
What's the thing most likely to help me glorify God?
Yeah.
And I think those are the types of things we ought to be asking. And we may come to different conclusions, right? There may be some people that ask that question and say, well, that means I'm not even going to consume any alcohol.
Yeah.
And that's not my personal conviction. But I understand why someone would take that approach. So I think that's the wisest thing to do. Now, of course, I know the people watching this go, what about this? What about this? We'll get to some of those. So what about CBD oil? Give me a quick rundown on, does everything we just said apply to CBD oils? Maybe start to tell us what it is if anyone's watching this doesn't know what that is and how this.
The chemical compound in marijuana, right? That the marijuana plant that's used for medicinal purposes at times. But there's two typical things that in the marijuana is the CBD and the THC. So CBD is the oil that now a lot of people are using to help for anti-inflammation and medicinal reasons. The difference between CBD oil and smoking weed or marijuana is that in CBD they've extracted or they've taken out most of the THC, the thing that actually makes you high.
Right.
So it's potentially more usable. Now the thing is, can you find good CBD oil that's actually beneficial? That's kind of what the argument is right now, is finding the good CBD oil that you can use.
Right. So there's a potential that maybe the marijuana plant can be processed in such a way that maybe it's not sinful.
Yeah.
But the likelihood is it's hard to really get a hold of quality CBD products that are actually going to be medically beneficial to you.
Correct. It's kind of like anything, right? When you're trying to buy clothing, is this a good brand? Is not a good brand? Is it good fitting? Like, so it's just flooding the market. So finding out what's the really good CBD oil that's truly the THC has been extracted, and what's the stuff that is just a liquid form of marijuana.
Yeah. I think when it comes to medicinal purposes, like, medical purposes, things of that nature, I think the same conversation should be had. People say, well, occasionally smoking marijuana can have medical benefits to you. And from everything I've read, that's probably true. There's probably some element of smoking weed that could have some positive medical benefit. However, the two overarching things I've heard from different ends of the spectrum, and you got to kind of get opinions from Republicans, Democrats, conservatives, liberals, and kind of everything in between. And so the two overarching things I've heard over and over again is, one is that the medical benefits of smoking weed is far less than what people make it out to be.
Yeah.
It's significantly less. Secondly, there are other products out there that will give you the exact same benefits that medicinal marijuana will give you, or better. It's very similar to, there's people say, well, a glass of red wine is good for your heart, which is 100% true. If you have a glass of quality red wine, before bed, it actually helps for your heart. But there's actually foods and organic grapes, if not more. That's not. Speaking from someone that I don't have a conviction against if using alcohol. If someone is responsible, you want to have a glass of wine at dinner, I'm not against that. But I don't think the idea of the medicinal or medical properties of wine is a really good argument in favor of wine, because there are other things that are better for you with the same properties that have zero risk of ever getting drunk or being high.
Yeah.
So I think generally medical marijuana, maybe it's helpful, maybe, but it's far less than you probably think. Products that are better for you that have the same properties and no risk of ever getting high or being inhibited in a way that's unhelpful.
Yeah.
And so, am I going to say that if you're living in a place where it's completely legal and a doctor prescribes it, that you're sinning? No, I'm not going to say that. But I would double check that before I engage in that. Just be really wise and be cautious as you engage in those kind of things. Would be my thoughts.
Yeah, and it all depends also on what we're talking about, what medical conditions, right? Like some people might be like, for anxiety, something different that we could do it, versus someone who it's like for pain, and they're like terminal cancer, and that might be helping them. Like there is a spectrum that we have to analyze it and be aware of when it comes to the medicinal reasons for it. So what Kenny's not saying, right? You're not saying is like don't ever take it. You're not allowed to take it, but just be mindful of it, especially for that category.
Yeah, I think that the idea of the terminal patient. I mean, we do that with other drugs already, right? Yeah. If someone has been given someone has been said, hey, you're in hospice, they're in pain, you're gonna die. And we dope those guys up with morphine or other drugs sometimes as a means to just give them comfort in the last few hours of their life.
Yeah.
Those moments are tragic. They're heart wrenching. They're heartbreaking. We give that person some pharmaceutical to just give them, to kind of help them ease the pain as they're dying tragically. If we're in a scenario where the only drug or the best drug is a medicinal form of marijuana, again, I'm not going to say it's sinful. I would just say those are probably extreme situations. The average person watching this video, that doesn't apply to that person, right?
Yeah, sure. So Kenny, what do you think should be the questions we should be asking ourselves? So far, I asked, is it permissible, beneficial? What's kind of like in your heart in there? Is there any other questions that we should be asking ourselves?
Yeah, I think I would ask a variation of the same question. Is it best?
Okay.
Is it ideal? And if the answer is yes, this is best for me to do in this moment, okay, then do it and be responsible.
Yeah.
But my assumption, my experience tells me that the vast majority of people watching this, the vast majority of the time, it is not going to be best for you to smoke weed or consume any kind of marijuana product. So you should probably avoid it.
Yeah. Yeah. That being said, one of the things that you could look at as we are looking at the landscape of our culture today is Colorado is a perfect example that they open the floodgates to marijuana, and people are like, there's so much money coming in, it's kind of helping. But on the flip side, there are so many rehabilitation centers currently addicted to weed. So, and the devastation that it's causing in Colorado right now, it's pretty devastating, and people are like, we can't get out of it. And the crazy part is that what's being sold now, it's not just normal marijuana like with the normal THC levels. They are amping it up, so the THC levels are extraordinarily high in those. What people are. Wise to do, but the thought process of how you get there is extremely important.
Yeah, I agree.
So with that in mind, I hope you guys have a